Welcome to the American Philosophical Society's online exhibition, Mapping a Nation, Shaping the Early American Republic. I'm Museum Guide and Manager Christine Freije, and I'm going to show you around. Maps serve many purposes in our lives today. Decorative maps might adorn our walls, travel maps may help us learn about a place we're visiting, and digital maps can help us find our way. In this exhibit, we invite you to think about who makes maps and how they do it, about the ways maps have influenced your understanding of the place you live, and about how maps relate to political and social power. Let's get started. I want to invite you first to look at these two maps. One is from the mid-1750s and the other from the early 1800s. Both depict the land we currently call the United States. Over about 60 years, the United States grew from a collection of colonies established on the unceded land occupied by indigenous peoples of North America to an independent nation headed for Western expansion. Neither of these maps was primarily used for navigation. Instead, they were both used in support of particular narratives about the US. They contributed to the country's national identity and mythology. The map on the left was produced for the British government by mapmaker John Mitchell. It overemphasized British territorial claims and, in doing so, inaccurately represented French, Spanish, and Native American boundaries. British politicians used these misrepresentations to generate support for fighting the French in the lead up to the 7 Years' War. This map would later be used to draw official boundaries after the American Revolution and was used as recently as 1980s to settle a border dispute between the United States and Canada. It's known as the most politically significant map of the British colonies in the history of the United States. Now take a look at the second map. This map was published in 1816 by mapmaker John Mellish. Notice how much has changed in just over 60 years. Like Mitchell's, Mellish's map has a particular cultural and political slant. He, like Mitchell, de-emphasized the holdings of the French, Spanish, and of Native Americans. And this was the first map to depict America as stretching from sea to sea. It could be interpreted as a call to American expansion and imperialism. But how were these maps made? Next, we'll learn about some of the tools that surveyors use to measure and draw detailed maps of the land. Mapmaking was never a one-person enterprise. Typically, the process of creating and distributing a map was a far-reaching collaboration between surveyors, draftsmen, engravers, and printers. The labor of all these participants was not always acknowledged. For example, on the first two maps we examined, only the names of the main authors were featured. Mapmaking is a science, an art, and a mathematical practice. And in order to practice it successfully, mapmakers would have to master the use of several different types of tools. The first tool we're going to highlight here is a surveyor's compass from 1765. This compass is probably quite a bit larger than the ones you're used to seeing. It was used by surveyors to determine direction. Compasses like this use a magnetic needle to determine horizontal angles. Here, you can see that the instrument maker's name, Duffield, and the place that the compass was created, Philadelphia, are written on the compass's face. The second set of tools we'll show you is a case containing drafting and drawing instruments. These tools would be used by surveyors to translate their measurements and observations of a landscape into accurate, mathematically correct drawings. You may see items that look familiar to you from geometry and math classes. Finally, this tool provides a behind-the-scenes look at how maps were published for wide consumption. This is a copper printing plate showing a map based on the Western expedition of Lewis and Clark. Engravers like Jacob Kime, who created this plate, had to copy hand-drawn images in reverse so that they would transfer properly when printed. Now that we've learned a bit about how maps were created and their changing uses over time, let's take a look at what maps of America looked like as the United States was beginning to form a national identity. In this section, we will observe the process of the colonization of North America by European nations through some early maps of the colonies and through map-making tools and guides. We'll also look closely at some objects related to populations of indigenous people and enslaved Africans, on whose labor, subjugation, and oppression this new country was built. Let's get started. This map from 1749 depicts the colonies of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and Delaware. One of the first things you may notice is that in addition to depicting the shape and size of those colonies, this map is covered in writing. The mapmaker, Lewis Evans, included not only place names, geographical details, and descriptions of natural resources, but also meteorological notes and information about electricity. This map is more than a mere description of a place. It attempts to show what these colonies had to offer potential visitors, settlers, or governments. Like anyone training to do a new job, surveyors had to learn skills and techniques to do their work effectively. This book, The Practical Surveyor by Samuel Wild, was a 1780 guide that young surveyors could purchase to help them learn their trade. This page shows a common surveying instrument of the time, the theodolite, and provides instructions about how to use it. But nothing could take the place of the practical experience of working in the field. This clock, owned by David Rittenhouse, would be brought along on map-making expeditions to help surveyors make precise calculations. As you can imagine, this portable clock was quite a load. Rittenhouse, a member and president of the American Philosophical Society and a prominent scientist and instrument maker, probably used this clock, which was built around 1769, to record the moment a star passed the meridian. He would later use that information to calculate the star's latitude. Despite the wealth of information displayed on the maps we've studied so far, maps often excluded or covered up essential information about populations of people inhabiting the lands they depicted. Slavery was largely hidden in most of the popular maps of this period, but depictions like this one from 1789, an image of the crowded deck of a slave ship, showed its horrors. This image was published by an abolitionist society in an attempt to reveal what many maps and other publications of the time tried to hide. As we discussed earlier, many maps produced by British and colonial mapmakers lacked proper acknowledgement of the lands that were inhabited and stewarded by indigenous peoples. This map is a copy of one drawn in chalk by Teedyuscung, a Lenape negotiator at a 1757 council of representatives of the Lenape, Haudenosaunee, and Shawnee. In the treaty that resulted from the council, these tribal leaders agreed to not fight with the French against the British in exchange for the return of land and an agreement that the British would not settle west of the Appalachian Mountains. The map displayed here is a copy of the one made by Teedyuscung, and this copy was made by Charles Thomson. This map, published in 1784, was the first map of the newly formed United States to be published after the Treaty of Paris ended the American Revolutionary War. It features this cartouche, or decorative emblem featuring the title of the map, which includes images referencing the important role that the French Navy played in the American Revolution. This map was meant to introduce a French audience to the geography and qualities of the young, newly formed nation. Once the United States was officially founded as a nation, maps and other tools served an important role in teaching citizens about the country they inhabited and about the world beyond their borders. In this section, we'll learn about mapping the states, globes and how they were used, and early histories of this new nation. Let's go. This pocket atlas was published in 1801 by Matthew Carey. Carey believed that accessible maps like this one would help inspire a sense of civic identity among citizens of the newly formed United States. This pocket atlas contains descriptions of individual states as well as census information. Each of these three maps provides a slightly different look at what was then known as the territory of Tennessee. The first map, drawn in ink and pencil and based on the surveys conducted by Daniel Smith, was a part of a campaign for Tennessee's statehood. The next map is again drawn in pencil and ink with some watercolor detailing. This drawing is smaller than the first copy we studied, which spanned 2 pages. This is the version that the third, the engraved copy, was based on. It features 2 Cherokee towns, Nickajack and Running Water, which were destroyed by settlers in 1794. This is just one example of how maps can help us learn not only about where we are, but about what was here before. At the same time that surveyors were producing maps of the young United States, historians and geographers were creating books for public consumption that would detail the history of these newly formed states. These 2 histories of New England were written around the same time by 2 authors who used the same source materials. Though Hannah Adams's book was highly regarded at the time, Morse's was more enduring, becoming a standard textbook for teaching geography for the next several years. Because of the ways that women were excluded from public intellectual life at the turn of the 19th century, Adams's book is one of the only examples of a work created by a woman that is displayed in this exhibit. Just as books like the ones written by Adams and Morse brought the study of geography and civic history to the people, globes like these 2 from 1795 allowed people to bring the complicated mathematical study of global geography into their homes. To own a set like this, which contained both a celestial and a terrestrial globe, would be expensive, a luxury reserved only for the upper classes. Most users of these globes would have also had to purchase a guide to learn how to use them, like the one shown here. These small books would help users solve mathematical problems using their expensive tools. For example, calculating values like latitude and longitude for a particular place. As the new country grew, so did the need to establish a new national capital, and surveyors played an essential role in mapping what would become Washington, D.C. Andrew Ellicott was the leader of a team of surveyors who produced this map of the nation's capital, but he received assistance from many others, including Benjamin Banneker, a free Black man who was a prolific surveyor, an author of almanacs, and a mathematician. Banneker's name is not featured on the map itself. Many of the contributors to the creation of objects in this exhibit, like Banneker, were not properly credited at the time because of their race, gender, or class. The period just after the end of the American Revolution was one of great change for the United States. The purchase of new lands, the growth of federal systems such as the Postal Service, the immigration of refugees, a growing abolitionist movement, and the desire for Western expansion and settlement all contributed to this period of turmoil. The result was a country that grew largely without regard for the indigenous occupants of the lands it was acquiring. Surveyors and explorers Meriwether Lewis and William Clark were sent on an expedition to traverse and map the newly acquired western lands of the United States. Lewis and Clark were assisted throughout their journey by Native Americans who lived on the lands they were sent to discover. The map shown on this page of Lewis and Clark's journal is a copy of a map that was drawn by, according to Clark's description, the great chief and one of the Chimnapum Nation. As the nation grew, it was essential that systems of communication kept up with the country's expanse. These two maps, produced by Abraham Bradley Jr., would hang in post offices around the country. If you compare the two, which were published in 1796 and 1804, respectively, you can see the addition of the massive swath of land bought from the French in the Louisiana Purchase. These two maps also show the rapid growth of the Postal Service throughout the country, going from 195 offices in 1793 to 1,283 offices 10 years later. As the country acquired new lands, its population both expanded and diversified. In 1791, enslaved people living in the colony of Saint-Domingue rebelled against the French ruling class to establish the independent nation of Haiti. This uprising led to a huge influx of refugees, including French planters and enslaved and free Africans, to the United States, and inspired fear among some Americans that a revolution of enslaved people could occur on their own soil. This map, depicting a northern coast of Saint-Domingue, was drawn in Philadelphia, which became a new home for many of those fleeing the island. Books like this, published in 1822 by Edward Holland, attempted to defend the ongoing practice of slavery and to advocate for its expansion, even as northern states were beginning to pass abolitionist laws. Slaveholders and those who might profit from slavery's expansion were particularly interested in fighting for its legality in the United States' newly acquired Western territories. We'll end our tour where we started, with John Mellish's map of the United States. This map was the first to depict the United States as stretching from sea to sea. It features Fort Astoria, just south of the Columbia River in present-day Oregon, which was the first permanent U.S. settlement on the Pacific coast. This map presents a biased vision of North America as open and available for white settlement, and provides a glimpse into the unjust ways America came to be the country it is today. By erasing and invading the lands that were occupied by Native peoples, by conflict with other nations, and by relentless expansion west. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope that the next time you look at a map, you'll consider, what is this map trying to show me? What is it covering up? How can I best use this map to help me in my understanding of where I am and in my pursuit of useful knowledge?